My question is, speaking of surprises, I was very surprised when the New York Times about a week ago came out with this bombshell expose of the Department of Justice laundering hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars in drug money. And I wanted to ask, what significance do you think this has in terms of removing Obama from office? Does this represent a signal on the part of a faction of the establishment that they're getting ready to pull the plug on Obama? And I guess a second correlated question is, how important do you think this Fast and Furious scandal is in terms of creating a kind of Watergate-like environment that would enable us to remove Obama?
Well, Fast and Furious is obviously going to be a factor which is used politically in the present situation. This is not a simple kind of situation, but there are many conflicting kinds of interests involved, particularly when something is not going too well. There's a tendency of someone to start lynching their neighbor. The thing, we've got some competition here. I got to lynch this guy who I was associated with, that sort of thing. So you're in a chaotic situation in which there's nothing positive coming out of this president. Nothing positive. For anybody who's serious, just as a citizen of any kind of interest, there's nothing for them in this president. He represents no good. He is a no good president, and worse. So therefore you have a tendency for people to jump ship. For example, you will tend to have people going from Republican to Democrat and Democrat to Republican in various ways. Simple things like that. There is very little inherent stability in the affinity tendencies within society today. Very few people trust anybody else. And the trust among people is much lowered than what it had been even at the time that Obama came into office. You think back to what it was like when Obama was first in office. Now, he was a bum, and I knew it. But in the first period of his incumbency, I was in a situation where I was working with people who were then working with Obama. I knew what he was. I knew he had been incarnated as president in some fashion or other. But then I began to see, after a couple of bills that were put through Geithner, I saw what was really going on. And therefore, in the following year, in the following spring, I had a complete diagnosis, a fully accurate diagnosis of exactly what this guy was, exactly what he was going to do. He's a carbon copy psychologically of the Emperor Nero. And stuck into office, in powerful office, he was going to act like the Emperor Nero more and more, as the Emperor Nero himself acted more and more like the Emperor Nero, as he began killing people indiscriminately, which is what this guy's doing now. So those are the kinds of problems we face. We're in a situation which the lack of the sign of a quality of leadership emerging, which could be trusted to do something which is needed badly now, the lack of that confidence is holding the American population at bay. They don't know who they can trust. And the more the Democrats continue to support Obama, and when they see the mess that the Republican assortment is right now, the American people tend to lose confidence in their own future. They don't have somebody that they think is even a decent guy they could trust as a bad president. You know, people often say, well, that president's no damn good, but I got to support him, he's the president. Right? But that doesn't exist anymore. This guy is pure bum, and there's no sign from the Democratic Party that they're going to do anything about it. And my assessment in looking at this situation is, and it's a good assessment, it's a knowledgeable assessment, there are a great number, relatively speaking, of Republicans who I would prefer over a large number of Democrats, and somewhat vice versa. So therefore, I realize that what we need to do this time, and the way we have to think about how we deal with the social situation out there, we have to think on the merit of the citizen, not the partisanship. Yes, partisanship is not indifferent. It's not an indifferent question. But we've come to a time when there's been so much betrayal of what people thought they trusted, that today you can only bring together an effective force in the Congress by putting the partisan aspect a little bit to the one side. And when it comes to the issue, it should be the issue as such, and the implications of that issue which we go with. When we get to that point, if we think we can possibly win, if we think we can possibly get the Obama out of office, I think you will see a revolutionary change in the reaction of the population. I mean, for example, if the word came out today, the Democratic Party is dumping Obama because he's a bum, for the various reasons, of course, which he'd be dumped. Then you would find a revolution in politics because the Democratic Party would, by and large, begin to become the Democratic Party again, at least in the rank and file. And at the same time, you would have Republicans who, having looked at somewhat what the Republican candidates are, would say, not that for me this time. And they would say, it's much better to be a citizen in holding office in the United States than to be a citizen being held in office by a party. And that's what we have. You've probably heard some of that today. The report that was given today was the fact is we're functioning as citizens first. We're functioning as citizens of the nation first. And when we run in office in a state, a federal office in a state, we are running as citizens of the United States, not members of the state primarily, but associated with the state in a secondary role on the state level. And that's the way it should be. And I think that that kind of formulation, once the shake-up were to occur, in which Obama had been thrown out, I would think you will find a strong bipartisan tendency among the incumbents on the federal level, while they might continue to have a state influence on the state level. And I think that's where we should be headed right now, because I know under those circumstances, like, for example, on the military question, we have a number of people who are tied to the U.S. military at the highest level, similar levels. They are actually more competent on some aspects of the military questions, and I trust them on that. I trust their instincts. I know them. So therefore, you would have some people, because of their state-level concerns or other concerns, professional concerns, might be more suited for the Republican Party at this time. Fine, so what? So therefore, we have a mixture of Republicans and Democrats, and maybe an independent or two thrown in here and there, right? But not actually thrown in, but that's right. And under those circumstances, I think if we can get that now, if we can get that understanding in the month of December, I think we've got it made. Because we're going into the early part of the next year, and then things are going to get sort of closed up in preparations for the coming presidential elections and state elections. This is the time, this immediate time. And I think it's possible. And I think it's necessary for me, for example, to do everything possible to make it happen, which is what I'm trying to do.